And that's the facade that the corporate interests have been banding around for a very long time. And I mean, it's time we call them out for what they are. And so you create more jobs in a decentralized waste management system. And this is just one part of the climate crisis.
Yes.
So imagine all the things you can do with all the other parts. And so I just think it's very deliberate, and like we've said in the past, the pursuit of profit is limitless. Those who are making money now want to keep making money so there's no more money to be made. And so they'll always encourage activities that will continue to let you help them make money. And then you never solve the problem.
Welcome to the Shafts podcast, and this is another episode of the Shafts Conversations, where we present to you intellectually stimulating discussions on key issues and bring you a more in-depth perspective on the subjects that concern you. Today's guest is also, surprise, surprise, a personal friend and also a former debate partner, and actually a former debater. Jacob Johnson Attakpah is a climate scientist, environmental policy analyst, and today we are going to be having a very, very important discussion about the climate, about the environment, and how it interacts with you. Welcome, Jacob Johnson Attakpah.
Charlie, thanks. Introducing me as your former debate partner.
Jacob, when was the last time you climbed onto the debate podium?
I mean, it's been a while. It's been a very, very long while. I think last time was in Tanzania, PADC, 2018,
wow.
I think, yeah.
That's not nice.
2018, yeah.
That's not nice. No, but I do also know that, like, as debaters, we almost never lose our skill. And within that period from 2018 till now, there are a lot of important things which you've done, which I'm going to allow you to say. But where has that led you? What are you doing now? Would you mind sharing that with the audience?
Oh, of course, why not? I think, since 2018, last competitive debate tournament, it's been quite a lot going on. I think after that, I got a master's degree, and I sort of immersed myself fully into the space I'm in now. That's the climate environment space, doing a bit of advocacy here and there, landing a portfolio with the Green Africa Youth Organization where I manage the Zero Waste Cities project, engaging a couple of international multilateral agreements and all that. So it's been quite a lot, but this is where we are now.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible because, like, those who know you would attest to this. We've seen you on TV3 and GTV countless, maybe more on GTV than TV3, which says a lot for the station of the nation. But we've seen you being a huge advocate for climate change and for the environment as a whole, speaking on some of these issues. And people want to see if there is a link between, because a lot of people study climate science and climate change in Ghana within the universities. But is there a way debate has connected to make it work for you, or has it empowered the way in which you approach this a bit differently? Yeah,
definitely. Back in uni in KNUST, my favorite class was a climate science policy class. That was the final year. It became my favorite because of the lecture that was taking us through Dr. No, but also because it's really sort of brought out the debate side of me in class, where a lot of people hadn't witnessed firsthand. So, of course, my mates knew I was doing debates and all that, because then, PADC time was during the first semester exam, so you have to miss exam, go and do debates, and then come back and write it later. So, of course, the mates knew I was doing debates and all that, but they hadn't sort of seen it in action. And, back in the day, a lot of the tournaments were in person. There was not the virtual tournaments where people can log into Zoom and watch you debate and all that. And I mean, the recording of the debates was not something that was as widespread as it is now. So they had really not seen me in action. And so bringing the debate part of my life and sort of fusing it with the science and then talking about policy in class, it sort of made my mates see me in a different light. And it was
they saw
a different JJ at the time. And I think since then, that's been the JJ that's been around, because then you sort of bring the personal part of your life, measure the professional, and then you have an identity that is around.
That's very powerful. Like in almost every space we find ourselves in, like all the debaters attest to it, that they end up being like at the top point of it because of just the ability it gives them to be able to refine their thoughts, think from different perspectives, and like the attitude and approach that they have. But moving away from that, I just want us to talk about your journey into climate science and environmental policy. How did you get into it? What would you say interested you so much, and what convinced you to stay in it?
It's
take a deep breath.
So during national service, I did my service at one of the state institutions where I worked with a politician who also happened to be a lawyer. So, and it was at the time when the post-first degree law thing was that law craze was there, and everybody was doing law and all that. And so, the temptation was there. Had a chat with this guy, amazing, I don't want to mention his name, but amazing guy. And he was a senior lawyer, very top lawyer. And so he was like, I should buy the GIMPA forms. He even writes a recommendation for me and all that. And at the time, you didn't need to buy the form. You download the form, print it, fill it, and then when you are submitting, you pay. And so I did all of that. He wrote me a very stellar recommendation because it was a government institution that dealt with legislation as well. And so I used to sort of support him in his committee meetings and all that. And he wrote a very stellar recommendation for me. And also I was supposed to submit to one of my friends, Festus, at that time. And I had a chat with one of my lecturers from undergrad, and he was like, I see you continuing this thing that you started, don't go and do the law. I mean, law is fine and all that, but stay in the space, stay in the field. And so, and at the time I was also scouting, of course, because it's literally after service. You're seeing what's going to work and what's not going to work. You're sort of weighing your options and all that. So I came across this graduate program at the University of Ghana. It looked amazing. It was climate change and sustainable development, because it brought the science part of it into more of the practical parts of it, and sort of merging the two of them, giving you more practice as opposed to just the theoretical aspect. And so I told him about this and told him this was my dilemma. And he says, Charlie, go and get the master's. And so then I sort of got into that, and it was a very good experience for me. That class really, really opened my eyes to a lot of things within the space that I didn't think even existed, even though I was studying sort of the science of it, the science of the climate, and now getting more practical about it. What does the science mean for the average person? What does the science mean to the farmer? What does the science mean to a fisherman? What does the science mean to even a pilot? It sort of brought out the practicality of the science that I was learning. And they say in the Ghanaian education system, it's all theory and all that. So this course sort of brought out the practical aspect of what I had learned during undergrad. And I can say that in hindsight, I don't regret it.
That's a good one. I mean, we'll be having the discussions where we talk about how the climate interacts with all of these different people. But before we go into that, what's your assessment of the way in which climate science and environment as a whole is taught in our university and schools? Because you do mention your dilemma in terms of moving away from it. I would say this is not a space which is saturated at all. And you have lots of students who come into these courses, and especially when you're in school, they tell you this is the future. Like, if you hear tech is the future, the way in which people approach it is very different. But we hear climate change is the future. In fact, it's not the future, it's our now. Do you think our attitude towards, especially with regards to how we structure the curriculum and how we are training and educating people, matches the level of urgency which is within the space?
I'd say that not to my satisfaction, if I should put it that way. So you're talking about how they tell you, like, this is the future, this is the now and all that. I'd say that from what I've seen, what I've experienced, it usually is that when those conversations are happening, there's a lot of people at the edges of the field, not so much getting into the middle and sort of seeing that, oh, yeah, this is the future. It's something that I'd want to do. Let me try it. But they never really get into the middle of it. They never even get into the thick of it. It's just at the edges, oh, yeah, climate change, yeah, it's a good thing. Like, okay, let's talk about it. It's what's happening now. It's what's making everybody a celeb, if you want to put it that way. And so, yeah, let's explore that. But I'd say that the kind of investment we have in climate education is not is not enough. And I say this because the part of the world where we are, sub-Saharan Africa, or let me say the part of the world where I am, sub-Saharan Africa is by far one of the most vulnerable places to climate change. We are heavily impacted by the shifts in climatic factors and all that. And so for a group of people or a geographical location that is impacted this heavily, you think that would pay more attention into sort of trying to educate ourselves, trying to build capacity to engage in conversations that sort of affect these things. But you'd see for many people, and I like to say I'm one of the people who was intentional about being in the space because I had the option of studying something else for my undergrad, but I started with climate science. And so I like to say I'm one of the people who was very intentional about getting into this space, number one. But number two, I was also intentional about staying within the space. And so even though I got caught in a dilemma of to do law, to stay in the field, I sort of was intentional. When I made my decision to stay, I was very intentional about staying. And in hindsight, again, I don't regret staying. And there's way more we can do in investing into the space, building knowledge, filling the gaps, building capacity of students and all that. There's way more that we can do. When you look at the curriculum that I, for example, went through, and I'm proud to say now it has changed because I have conversations with colleagues, because my department in Kenya University was a very small one. Well, it was physics and climate science, but now we're departments on our own. And we're not so many in the department. So you have the opportunity of always chatting with the young ones who are like in the classes or in the course now, in the department now. And it's changed totally because they recognize the new trends. They recognize what's happening, what colleagues out there are learning, but also they recognize the very specific situation in which we find ourselves in Africa. And so they're tailoring curriculum to sort of suit that. And that's one thing I'm happy about with the curriculum in KNUS. And even if you come to the University of Ghana, where I had my postgrad, there is a whole course that is centered around how you be able to engage in policy making. Because a lot of these things are sort of guided by policy. The science, you need the science, it's true. The science informs policy, but then policy is the final thing. Even though the science is sort of set in stone or even sometimes contestable and all that, policy is the final thing. Policy is what shapes everything then. And so if we're not training people in the science and letting them know how the science can inform policy, we're sort of doing a disservice to ourselves. And so I think that the field is evolving. The education bit of it is evolving. Like curriculum is also evolving, but I still feel there's way much more to do because when you look at the education around climate science, sort of focus heavily in the global north. So there's this, I don't know whether it's an unspoken truth, that the Scandinavian countries are way more concerned about climate change than anybody else because they recognize their unique position. Exactly. They recognize their unique position, and so they're investing in building knowledge, building capacity, filling the scientific gaps. But for those of us in Africa, it's like we chanced on the climate change conversation. We need to participate in it, so let's just go and participate in it. There's very, very little amount of intentionality when it comes to building capacity around that. And I think those are some of the things that we need to do better on.
There's several layers to peel over here, right? But I just want to, first of all, let us start with the basics to help people understand. When you say climate change, even in the first place, what do you mean? What are you referring to?
I'm one of those people who believe that climate change does not have one meaning because it means different things to different people based on their lived experiences. So climate change means something totally to somebody living in the Arabian desert. It means something totally different to somebody living in Scandinavia. Totally different to somebody living in southern tip of Africa, even West Africa, different. So based on the effects that you feel, you have a notion of what climate change is. And that's why previously, climate change didn't used to be climate change. It was more of global warming because then everybody thought, oh, the world is sort of getting hotter. But then we realized that it's not just getting hotter. In some places, it's getting colder. So we're having extreme temperatures. It's not just getting hotter. It's getting very cold as well. So I did some assignments. I don't want to call it a paper. I did some assignments when I was doing my postgrad. And it's one of the things that I found out, that one of the waterfalls that's on the border of Canada and US got frozen at some point in time. So people actually skate on the lake. Wow. Right? People skate on it. And that was sort of unheard of.
Yeah.
Was unheard of.
Yeah.
And so it's not just getting warm, it's getting very cold as well. And so you're having extreme temperatures, not just being in the balance and then getting shifted to the warm place. And so for somebody at the sort of southeastern coast of Ghana, go to a place like Keta, there's rising sea levels.
Yeah.
That's what climate change means to them.
Yeah.
Rising sea levels. Somebody who lives in the northern part of Africa, who is somewhere, doesn't care about rising sea levels. They are more concerned because the temperatures during summer are getting hotter and hotter. When you go to Europe, they're experiencing heat waves, very intense heat waves. And so for somebody in Europe who is experiencing intense heat waves, climate change doesn't mean rising sea levels. It doesn't mean their lakes are getting frozen. They are losing livelihood. It doesn't mean they are losing land like people are experiencing in Keta. It doesn't mean that ice is thawing and is exposing pathogens that had previously been buried under ice. It doesn't mean those things to them. It means different things to different people. And so for climate change, scientifically, they'll tell you what climate change is. It's what the average is a change in the weather conditions over an average of 30 plus years and all that. But practically speaking, it means different things to a farmer who hasn't had rainfall in Ghana, for example, as we're experiencing now, who hasn't had rainfall for 2 months now, and their crops are failing. That's the effects of climate change to them.
Would you say that level of subjectivity has made it difficult to be able to communicate the message and to get people on board? Because we all speak about climate change and say it's a collective problem. Guys, band together, the world is dying. And now you say it means different things to everyone. That means that's an affront to the collective action problem. So would you say that subjectivity has been a bane of issues, I would say?
It's been one of it. And let me also sort of speak like, no, I don't think it's a Ghanaian politician. It's the activists who say this, lack of political will. It's the activists who say lack of political will.
101.
Yeah. So it's one of it because it means different things to different people. When you are sort of, for example, when you go to the Conference of Parties to the UNFCCC, the Paris Climate Accord, because people have different interests, they're going to negotiate on things that mean something to them. So, for example, because it means heat waves for somebody in Europe, when they go there, they are going to negotiate on tangents. Because it means the loss of land, loss of livelihood to the people in Keta. When Ghana's negotiating team goes there, they're going to negotiate and focus more on adaptation and loss and damage. Meanwhile, somebody in Europe will most likely want to focus on mitigation, for example. And so because it means different things to different people, banding together has become very problematic because we have different perspectives on what it is. But then again, when you do multilateral arguments, they tell you that you don't come to the table with demand set in stone. You have to give, and something has to give, and all that. That is what we're not finding. So you find that in the textbooks, but practically speaking, we're not getting a lot of that. But I would say one of the reasons why we've been unable to come together to sort of drive home a lot of very practical action is because it means different things to different people. Another reason is because there's also interest. And let me throw in this quote we used to use in debates back in the day: the pursuit of profit is limitless.
Yes.
So capitalists always want to make money.
Yeah.
And even in these days, it's not just capitalists. Everybody wants to make money. And so for people who have very vested interests and are producing things that harm the climate, for example, they don't want to let go of that money. And let me be quick to call out oil and gas here. They don't want to let go of that money. They don't want to let go of that money. They know the science is
clear.
It's clear, it's sound, but they don't want to let go of that money. So instead of cutting down on fossil fuel extraction, the easy thing to do is to say, oh, we're diversifying the portfolio. And it's a very funny thing.
You think it's all just talk?
Yeah, because when you say you're diversifying the portfolio, I mean, you know what is giving you the headache. Why can't you just stop it? Why do you want to say, oh, I'm going to cut down on it and still suffer a bit of the headache while getting something else done?
I don't want to wade into that discussion as of yet, but the pushback that these companies do have, and even states do have that concern, is that the pursuit of climate change goals affects economic progress. So if you now have like whole economies entirely dependent on natural resources and corporations need to make a shift away from it, these are people who are getting left behind on the economic ladder, and states are not willing to make that sacrifice. So if they can make that trade-off in a small way by diversifying, don't you think it's a good approach, or the climate change problem is too urgent to be playing such games with?
Number one is too urgent, but number two, that's the facade that corporate interests have bandied around for a very long time. Let me give you one example of a part of this climate change problem that instead boosts your economy and creates more jobs for you as opposed to doing business as usual. Let's take waste management, for example. And when people ask me, I like to say I work in waste management. One of the very potent gases that contributes to the climate crisis is methane. And the way methane is produced generally in waste management, for example, and even in rice cultivation as well, is when in waste management, for example, we send a lot of mixed waste like organics, recyclables, all that to landfills, and then it undergoes anaerobic respiration, produces methane. So they will tell you that let's do that because corporate interests make money from landfilling. So when a company, for example, secures a plot of land, they charge the government for filling the land. So they now own the land. For every truck that you drive in there to dump waste, they make money of it. But when you practice what I work on currently, which is zero waste systems, you create more jobs because as opposed to creating the problem, and these days people are even saying that there's a way that even if you sort of create a problem and send all the waste to a landfill, you can then harvest the methane from there. The question is, why don't you prevent the problem as opposed to creating it and trying to solve it? Why do you want to sort of create a problem and still create the solution? And if you look at it critically, that's what capitalism is about. No offense to all the capitalists out there, but that's what capitalism is about. Create a problem and try to solve it. And so practicing zero waste systems looks like this. You segregate your waste at source. When you segregate your waste at source, you have recyclables.
You mean like group?
You keep your waste like apart.
Yeah.
So you have different categories of waste. For example, you have organic waste, which is the ones that can degrade. You have recyclables, which you can then use for recycling. You have electronic waste, which can also be recycled in some aspects. And then you have residual waste, the ones that you can't do anything about, for example. And then maybe you can say you want to biostabilize that and send that to a landfill. But for the organic waste, you can compost that. And if you look at the system, Ghana, for example, we import a lot of chemical fertilizers that are subsidized and given to farmers. While we can generate a lot of organic compost here in Ghana and use that to farm a lot of food and not have to import the chemicals and then sort of, again, governments going ahead to subsidize and then giving it to farmers. Farmers themselves can compost. So when you go to Kolebu, just here in Accra, there's a material recovery facility that the organization I work for operates at La. We produce a lot of compost there. In Adansi South, we do the same thing. We give that to farmers to farm. And they will tell you the difference between compost yield and chemical fertilizer yield. The difference is vast. And there's an unspoken truth around in Accra that, not even in Accra, in Ghana generally, that when you have fruits or vegetables grown from compost and you fail to refrigerate them, they even last longer outside refrigeration than when you do that for the ones that are grown with chemical fertilizer. Exactly. And so there's a whole chain of jobs that you can create when you decide to segregate. Because when you segregate waste, if you don't segregate waste, scenario one, which is business as usual, one truck comes, takes all the waste, drives it to a landfill, dumps there. That's the end. When you segregate your waste, different people can pick the different kinds of waste that you have. So you create income for the person who is picking up your organic waste, create income for the person who is picking up your recyclables. And the thing is that with the zero waste system, you as a household pay one fee for collecting all of it. And the reason why you pay one fee and not different fees, because the person collecting your waste is collecting a resource, not waste. So that is their raw material. And in Nigeria, they say one person's waste is another person's raw material. So you are discarding your waste. The waste picker or whoever is picking the waste is picking up a resource that he's going to use to start a whole new production. And so he's keeping, or he or she...
And there's also an incentive for them to go out there to go and pick it up.
Exactly, because then they know that that's their resource. And so they come and then they are pushing those resources into a circular loop. And so the world that we have now, we know that resources are finite. They're not infinite. And so the only way you can preserve those is to use the ones that you have now in a circular manner where they can be able to regenerate. And so you have organic waste. That is that is returned to the soil as carbon. Use that to regenerate food, and you can eat that. And you don't even need to centralize your waste processing like it's done elsewhere. You can decentralize your waste processing. Like we have the facility in La, just here in Accra. That's serving both La and Teshi. And we're looking at expanding. Currently, we're expanding to 3 other neighboring municipalities. And the goal is to expand to all the municipalities in Ghana so that we can decentralize waste management, because it doesn't make sense that we produce waste in Accra, put all of it in a truck, and drive all the way to the eastern region to go and dump it. We are using fuel, for Christ's sakes. We are using fuel to fuel these trucks all the way to eastern region to go and dump them. So when you have your business as usual, you have just one truck driver, maybe an assistant or conductor or whatever it is, 2 people that have that job. But if you decentralize your waste system and have your segregation at source, you create employment for other people within the chain. And so where's the argument that climate change, the climate action is a struggle between the environment and the economy? When you look at it in this way, it's a false dichotomy. And that's the facade that the corporate interests have been banding around for a very long time. And I mean, it's time we call them out for what they are. And so you create more jobs in a decentralized waste management system. And this is just one part of the climate crisis. Yes. So imagine all the things you can do with all the other parts. And so I just think it's very deliberate, and like we've said in the past, the pursuit of profit is limitless. Those who are making money now want to keep making money so there's no more money to be made. And so they'll always encourage activities that will continue to let you help them make money. And then you never solve the problem.
There's a lot to unpack here. And I'm glad you did mention the waste management system, because one of the things which is plaguing Accra and most of our urban cities is we are drowning in waste. You say waste management, what I see is
mismanagement,
a waste catastrophe. Yeah, because you describe it in a nice way where people are coming in, picking your dustbins and things. But for the majority of people who make the waste, they stand in front of their door and fling it out there. So I'm glad you do mention it. But what if someone says that, well, you're also just saying the nice things, these are hard to do. If they were easy, everyone would be doing them. Maybe you're also the one just giving us...
I'm the one banding the facade around.
No,
I mean, the things I have said are not textbook material. These are things that are happening on the ground. You go to Adansi South. Yeah, you go to Adansi South, you see it there. You come to Accra, you see it here. You go to Kampala, you see it there. You go to Gabron, piloting it there. And so when I'm saying these things, it's not just some, abstract idea that I'm preaching. These are things that Green Africa Youth Organization, GAYO, is doing on the ground that you can see. And so when you go to La, you see households segregating their waste. You see bags of compost being produced. You see plastic bales being moved for recycling. And all these things are so that we can give back the dignity that have been taken away from waste pickers and the informal sector, because they've been treated for a long time as a nuisance. And it's time that we see them for who they are. And there was a study commissioned by the Greater Accra Resilient and Integrated Development, GARID, under Ministry of Sanitation. Of all the waste that's generated within the Greater Accra metropolitan area, 49% is collected by the formalized sector. 51% or 50%, the 1% unaccounted for. 50%, which is more than the formalized sector, is collected by the informal sector. And so let's assume that waste pickers, aboboya, tricycles, were not working in Accra. See, even with the waste that they are collecting, see the situation we have. So assume that 50% of waste is not being collected. You can imagine what Accra is going to look like. It's going to be hell for all of us.
Inhabitable.
It's going to be hell for all of us.
I mean, we don't think about.
We don't think about that because we see them as, they are doing some work, it's fine, but they are a nuisance to us. Maybe let's do away with them. I mean, I don't wish for this to happen. But if they decide to go on strike for one day, the informal sector waste collectors in Accra decide to strike on one day, you will see the hell that we'll be living in this Accra. So, I mean, it's time we sort of put a value to the work that they do. We see them for what really they are, because we are not doing them a favor by giving them our waste. They are doing us a favor by collecting our waste. Because if they decide not to collect the waste, it's going to be a catastrophe.
Well, you mentioned all these nice ideas. You guys are going to conferences and pitching these ideas. Is it that the government of these nations, and specifically our nation also, are not hearing these things? What is the problem? Is it money? Because quite recently, for example, we know of sanitation ministers who have 40 million in their bedrooms. So I can be sure that it's not about the money. And some of these things which you are mentioning, where it's cyclical and saying that it has the ability to give us money, then it's not an expense, it's an investment.
Yeah,
so
definitely
what exactly is the problem?
I think it's very complex, beyond the fact that there is, of course, the usual lack of political. I don't know why it's funny when I say that, but of course, beyond the fact that there's the usual lack of political will, there's also a lot of vested corporate interest around. And so there are people, like I mentioned earlier, making money off the system as it is. They're making money when we do business as usual. So there's really no incentive for them to push for a systems change.
Yeah.
There's really no incentive. Because for somebody who gets paid money per truck for dumping your waste, if you start segregating your waste at source and you're composting your organic waste, you've reduced his truck by, say, about 30% waste.
Yeah.
When you separate your recyclables, paper, plastics, or the plastics that are recyclable, you've reduced his container by a further 30%. When you take away the other streams of waste that are the hard to degrade organic waste that necessarily cannot be composted but can be used for charcoal briquettes, smokeless briquettes, for example, or electronic waste, you've reduced it by a further 30%. What's he left with? 10% of his truck, and he's getting less money from that.
Yeah.
So there's really no incentive to push for a systems change.
Does that prove the point I was making in the beginning, that there are indeed some losers? Do you think climate policy, especially in the way it is being drafted now, accounts for those losers?
I think the net loser here is us. Is us. No matter how you want to look at it, some people may want to say it's the environment, some people want to say it's the climate, but really it's us. Because then, when for example now, currently in Ghana, there's a ban on the export of grain.
Okay. Yeah.
And the ban is because the stakeholders are not even sure that the grain we have in Ghana is enough to feed us. So if we are compounding a problem because somebody or some group of people somewhere are making money from it, and then the problem then comes back to us as reduced rainfall, or let me say irregular rainfall patterns that affect farmers, and the grain that they produce, the yield, is not enough to feed your population, who is losing? It's definitely not the environment. It's definitely you.
Yeah.
Because then you will have a state of emergency very soon, and then have to now take money out of your coffers to go and import grain from somewhere. Yeah. So definitely it's not the environment. You are the one who is losing. And so I always say that the net loser in any system where human beings are making profits off is the same human beings that are making that profit.
Yeah.
Because you're just making money in one aspect, you're losing way more in another aspect. And so the loser is always us. And when there is no sense of urgency to address the problem, then you resort to things like, let's decentralize it. And so that's why we have a more decentralized approach, a community-led approach to the waste management thing that we're doing, where we want communities to own it. Because if we're going to rely on governments to say, go to COP, negotiate this, negotiate that, go to this conference, negotiate this, negotiate that, time is going. Time is fast spent.
Yes.
And because people have different interests coming to the table, they're going to keep on negotiating for 30, 50 years. We may never get there. But if communities, the people who are at the front line, start shifting the narrative, start shifting where the responsibility should be, even though it's not the ideal thing, start shifting where the responsibility should be to themselves, owning community-led initiatives like composting, owning community-led initiatives like putting up weather stations where they can be able to track meteorological data and they're able to inform decisions by bigger corporations like GMET and all those things, then it's good. But if you want to wait on central government, you keep waiting and you never get anywhere.
I want to throw in a wildcard question here, and I think this submission you just gave is very important. But I have an idea that previously in the past, in our traditional communities, these efforts were in existence. They made efforts to calculate what's the pattern of rainfall, share that data. They made efforts to try and clear water bodies. So there's talk about like folk laws which existed, which didn't allow you to desecrate certain natural resources, which helped to preserve them. Do you think, and urbanization has its own problems, but do you think this level of urbanization and modernization is something which has exploded this problem, and we've lost maybe a bit of that community feel and the power to be able to implement those changes.
Yeah, so that concept of Sankofa essentially is telling you that your value systems from the past are not entirely desolate. You can go back and pick them. And to me, that's what I call indigenous knowledge. Because back in the day, they didn't have a good hold on the science to show you that when you farm so close to the water bodies, in the event that there's a downpour, the river could go beyond its borders and flood your farm. Or some chemicals or whatever could leach from your farm into the river body, contaminating your own source of water again. There was a lot of very indigenous science that was grounded or rooted in taboos, folklore, and myths, and what have you. But when you put all of that under a very scientific microscope, you realize that they were right.
Yes.
So some forests were set aside as evil forests. Nobody goes in there. You're not supposed to cut the forest and all that. Let's assume that our Chimota forest was one of those things, and we still believe that there were some gods in there that if you enter the forest, nobody is going to demarcate that place and say they are going to use to build whatever they want to build. Nobody's going to do that because you're scared that the minute you take an axe or you take a chainsaw and walk into that forest, you'll be struck down dead. And so all those things were for very good reason. But again, civilization and I don't want to call it wokeness, but our seeming intelligence has made it in such a way that we are now able to see through all the taboos and all that. And so we're taking actions that are detrimental to ourselves. But those people who lived back then were wise in their own way. And it's indigenous knowledge. And that's why they know that so you don't go to sea, I think, on Tuesday? And I think you don't go to farm on a certain day as well. And even back then, they used to do shifting cultivation because they say that if you farm, for example, if you farm maize on this particular piece of land, the gods have eaten maize for this season. So next season, they can't eat maize again. You need to plant something else.
So the gods have balanced that.
Exactly. And it was for very good reason because the science will now tell you that if you keep planting the same crop on the same piece of land, crops have specific nutrients that they like. And so they are going to deplete that nutrients in the soil to the point where if you keep planting the same one, they won't get access to it. But also your crops will now become very prone to diseases and pests. And all those things now, if you look at them, very scientific. But back then, they were taboos. And now we claim to be intelligent, so to hell with the taboos and all that.
For intelligence, we've rather reversed.
We've rather become very unintelligent. And so if you look at it very well, there's a lot of things that local people are doing that need to be amplified. There's a lot of things that local people are doing that need to be amplified. People at the front line of communities. And when you look at the people who sort of suffer the most from these things, and I always say they are the ones who know the problem very well. They are the ones with the solutions because they've lived with the problem for a while. They have the solutions. But we always like to go and sit somewhere and think up something that we think is the most genius thing that we have and then just go and shove it down the throats of local people and say, this is the solution we have, you need to implement it. Without even asking them, how do you feel about this problem? How do you think it can be solved? It might not be the best response that they will give you, but that piece of indigenous knowledge that they have can contribute very much to the kind of solutions that we tailor for these communities. And that's why in the work that we do at GAIU, one of the very first things that we do in implementing any project is to be able to go to the community and do community engagement. You talk to the people and know what the problem is. Because you are sitting in Accra, you don't have a better idea of what is happening in Terkpertey more than the people living there. You are in Accra. What do you know about Terkpertey? So you go to Terkpertey from your Accra, go and listen to what the problem is. Then you can subject it to your science, subject it to the indigenous knowledge that they have, and find a middle ground, as opposed to always cooking up solutions and feeding to people and asking them to swallow it hook, line, and sinker.
We've already touched on the role that corporations have to play, the role that communities also do have to play, but we need to start admitting that some of these actions also are individual. And when you speak about things like segregation, people think climate change requires a complete change in lifestyle. I know people who get angry because, till today, people stay in taxis and throw their rubbish out.
Oh, I cried. I said that.
Yeah, and Like, people just can't imagine. They're like, yeah, why wouldn't you provide us with dustbins? Like, why do I need to separate my waste? So I need to buy 3 dustbins. Like, why do I need to take it to this faraway place before I do it? And people think of the inconvenience. And on top of that, people now say, well, it's corporations. They are producing all of these things. Why are you asking me to change? What's it going to matter? How much do you think individual change or our drive for change would affect us reaching some of these collective goals?
Yeah, I think that no matter how you look at it, you can't take either individuals or corporations out of the mix, because I didn't study economics, but the laws of demand and supply. If, for example, let's talk about the issue of plastics, single-use plastics that are polluting our environment. If there's no demand of single-use plastic, the corporations will shut down.
Yeah.
Because they'll produce so much onto the market, they're not getting their money back, they will fold. Then again, if the people or individuals are asking for way much more, the corporations will also keep producing.
Yeah.
And so you cannot take one person out. You cannot lay the blame solely on corporations or lay it solely on individuals or consumers. We all have a role to play. But I always like to blame corporations more because they're the ones making money off the problem. Really, they're the ones making money off the problem. They're making so much money off the problem. And again, on the issue of plastics, there was this report released by UNEP. Globally speaking, there's less than 10% of plastics recycled. And so corporations will tell you, oh, we'll produce single-use plastics. We'll collect and recycle it. Out of all that, less than 10% is being recycled.
They don't.
The rest of it, either in the oceans or some burning pit somewhere or some incinerator somewhere, some co-processing cement kiln somewhere or something. And those are the things that we call false solutions, because they take away your focus from what the problem is.
Yeah.
Because your problem basically is that you're producing way much more plastics than you should be producing. The waste management system cannot handle all of it. So if you produce all of it, the waste management systems are inadequate. But again, the resources are finite. You are polluting when you're producing. So even if you empower your waste management structures to be able to take care of all of it, you're still polluting. Because beyond the fact that you may not see the plastic in the streets, in the gutter, in the ocean, or wherever, plastic itself is from the petroleum industry. It starts from monomer, becomes a polymer, and that's from oil and gas. And there is pollution across the entire life cycle, from fracking or wherever you're getting your oil from, wherever. There's pollution across all those places. And so we're polluting the air, number one. People live close to these places. They are breathing in very poisonous air. Even when you don't have systems to be able to sort of recycle the plastics, people burn them. And the amount of particulate matter that they inhale, the toxic gases that they inhale. So 5 years from then, 10 years from then, the person will go and then be complaining of some cardiovascular disease or some respiratory disease or what have you, forgetting that they were burning their plastics back then. And that responsibility was corporate responsibility, because they were producing way too much and didn't put in a system to be able to collect that waste back.
I'm keen to talk about some other stuff, especially with regards to the messaging. But just quickly on the attitude of corporations now, do you think the movement as a whole, the climate change movement, has focused a lot more on green badging and messaging, and that is what is influencing these corporations to want to appear? Because this is not only a symptom within the climate change space, especially it's a symptom of almost all social advocacy groups and how corporations are responding to them. Like diversity, corporations are saying we are 50% diverse when they are clearly not. Companies are greenwashing, countries are sports washing, and everyone is claiming that they are doing the good thing, but the problems still exist. And for me, I think it's even a far more dangerous problem for everyone to pretend they are doing the right thing than for people to actually just be doing the wrong thing. Yeah,
I mean, I agree with you totally. It's also by way of the kind of messaging that has come with the climate crisis and the kind of solutions that we've demanded in the past. In the past, we've demanded corporations to recycle more. We demanded corporations to sort of implement we've demanded countries to implement extended producer responsibility regimes so that corporations who produce these products can be responsible. Those are the kind of solutions that we've asked for in the past.
Yeah.
And so corporations responded to those demands, and that is why we are here today. And that's why I'm very happy with the new treaty that we're negotiating at UNEP, the Intergovernmental Negotiation Committee on developing the legally binding instruments on plastic pollution. And the focus there is to reduce polymer production, not to ask for EPR alone. We're looking at the problem from the entire life cycle. Sorry, extended producer responsibility. Yeah. So where producer companies or companies who produce items, whatever, are responsible for the end of life of that product. So, for example, in the plastic space, you pay EPR. What that means is that you are paying for the waste management of the plastic, not just putting it on the market. You're responsible for collecting the products back from the market when it gets to end of life. Yes.
They are just given a responsibility
to manage it. And that is something that we've demanded for in the past, and that is how come the corporations responded in that way. So they still produce 100 million pieces now. They can double to 200 million pieces tomorrow, but they will justify that increase, the 100% increase in production, by saying, we are paying our EPR levies.
Yeah.
And that's just it.
And at the same time, then it's just 10% of these that are
yes. And that's just it. And so this new treaty is looking across the entire life cycle. So rise from polymer production, we are saying reduce the number of polymers that you produce, so that when you reduce the number of polymers, you reduce the number of products that polymer can make, and then you reduce the burden on the waste management system. So it's not just let's deal with the waste. Let's go to where the problem is starting from. The pollution from the fracking for the oil and gas, the production of the polymers, the production of the product itself, and even let's look at the chemicals that you mix with the polymers itself to produce the products, because then there's the tendency of some chemicals to bioaccumulate in humans, and we've seen even those in fishes as well, where forever chemicals like the PER and then the polyfluoroalkyls bioaccumulate in fishes. Yeah. When they bioaccumulate in a fish, the human goes to eat it, then it bioaccumulates in the human now. And so we are seeing all of that from these chemicals that are being used to produce plastics. And so we are moving beyond the pay EPR. Let's look at where the problem is coming from, your overproduction. And so all these things are there. We're also looking at reducing food waste. So telling hotels that when you serve buffet, put a sign there that says that you can always come back, only dish out what you can eat, as opposed to dishing out a whole heap of food, taking 2 spoons, and then you are done with it.
Glorify it, actually.
And that's the thing. When you come to these sides of the world, it's like you're a rich man when you eat and then you leave half the food on the plate. Yeah. Where did that come from?
I had a lecturer who just did an outstanding job of scaring me about food waste, and he depicted it by showing that 1 grain of rice, if everyone leaves 1 grain of rice on their table, 30 million Ghanaians, that's 30 million grains of rice. And he calculated till I was like, okay, this is crazy.
Yes.
And it came up to about 40% of the food that we produce on a yearly basis goes back into the bins.
Yeah.
And that is not just about the food, it's about the labor that goes
into it, the resource that goes into it.
Yeah.
And farmers are not getting irrigation systems to be able to power their farms. No. The little that they produce for us, we are wasting half of it on our plates because we want to form rich. Where did that notion come from? And so when you go to other places, there's what we call an example from the Philippines. They call it food rescue. So you go to an event, you go with a bowl, you eat what you have. If there's leftover, you carry it and take it home and go and eat the rest. But in Ghana, you can't do that because the people will now be looking at you as if you are poor.
They'll shame you.
So they'll rather...
What you take away?
What you say? What you take away? So they'll rather the food goes to the bin than have somebody else eat it. And sometimes you ask yourself, so when did this notion start? Like, where did it start from? Can we go back to that time and try to course correct? Like, where did it start from? And all these things are problematic because then a lot of resources, like you mentioned, like your lecturer said, go into producing just that 1 grain. So imagine that, and it takes me back to the point where there was this conversation I was having with the Ghana's HE to Kenya when I was there. We were on a safari ride, and he was saying that people's notion about waste management differs from country. So even though Kenya is in sub-Saharan Africa, there's a visitor who came and then he says he was eating banana peel on a safari ride, and he says that, oh, I mean, this one here is degradable, so can you throw it into the park? And then the tour guide asks him that, does he know how many people come through this park in a day? He says he doesn't know. Give him a ballpark number. And then he says that, imagine if everybody comes here, eats just one banana, and decides to throw the peel right at the spot because you say it will degrade. Do you know the kind of eyesore that you'll be creating when the last person who visits the park in a day gets here? Because let's assume there's 500 people visiting the park. That's 500 peels of banana. Yeah. And beyond the fact that it's going to degrade eventually, you're creating an eyesore at the park. Yeah. You are altering the ecosystem around that place. And so it's more of, people see it, oh, if I throw my one piece of plastic outside, what's the problem? You need to imagine, if everybody before you and after you does the same thing, what impact are you going to create? And that's where a lot of people don't really see that. And so when I go out with my bottle, I drink water as much as possible. Even when I enter a bank, I try to, so when I'm running low, I try to fill up there as opposed to going to buy it. And it works for me, as opposed to depending on single-use plastic. I mean, somebody makes money from that single-use plastic again, but I'm also seeing my carbon footprint. I'm checking my environment footprint as well, seeing that when I leave today, what's the amount of carbon footprint I have left? What environmental impact have I left? If everybody is giving my kind of impact, environmental impact, will this place be habitable for us? And I think we need to move beyond thinking around individualized and thinking collectively and looking at it from that perspective.
There's still a lot to discuss, right? But I want us to start talking about our cities, because you do mention a collective action problem. Is there a way to reimagine our cities with climate change in mind? Because look, for example, at the problems in Accra, apart from the waste management you point out, severe flooding issues.
Yeah, there's a lot of brown buildings all over the place.
And things like traffic, right? Now we are seeing more smart roads, climate-friendly cities, which are evolving and are trying to deal with some of these problems in a new way, which is increasing the aesthetics. Like, I think my very first experience when I came back and I drove was that it was very hot. And
you're not seeing it.
It was very hot. And I just said, look on the left. I looked. Look on the right. I looked. And what has happened was that they had cleared the roads, built extra roads. They had cleared the land after the roads, built huge buildings.
Motorway,
for example. Single tree. Yes. Motorway used to be like a road in the middle of bush.
So, now you've seen the expansion that we're doing. I think we're going to do a 10-lane motorway or something like that.
So what's the point? If the point is just to build more and more and more and more, like who is sitting now and thinking about, okay, wait, let's stop. What are we doing to ourselves? Because now the traffic in the city is really bad, flooding in those cities, and you are saying that climate change and the pursuit of it can provide a solution to these things.
I can talk about the problems and see. When you look at, there's a couple of sensors that have been installed on the Liberation Road stretch. Peak traffic hours in the mornings when people are going to the central business district, and in the evenings when they are sort of returning. If you see the way the air quality sensors buzz red during those times, see, you go over you. And all these things are contributing more and more to compound the crisis that we're in. Because these are short-lived climate pollutants. Even though they are short-lived, they are very, very, very potent. PM 2.5, black carbon, the likes. They're very, very potent. And so they contribute to making this place hot because, one, we're cutting down our trees. We're cutting down our trees, making everywhere either paved or tiled or tarred or whatever it is. Glass house. There's no single tree and all that. And the whole place is just getting browner and browner and browner. There's very little green and all that. And sometimes you wonder, we are committing to a lot of these environmental agreements globally. We are forging partnerships with several other cities and doing this sister city thing where we learn from them, they learn from us and all that. So is nobody thinking about how can we make Accra bearable? Or it's just about expanding the road network, because the cars are getting more and more and more and more.
And they will get more and more and more the more you expand.
So even if you expand to a 10-lane motorway, more people are buying cars. The traffic that you see today will increase by the time you complete your 10-lane motorway and all those things. So why can't we have, and I think, which year was that? I think it was when Mills, God rest his soul, was president. I think he had this idea of doing a multi-modal transport system in Accra where you pick a train for some time, get down, pick a boat. And I think when Mills left, the idea died. Then this government, I think in 2020, said we're going to do trains. They were going to do more trains. So I think Temampakadan and more places were going to get trains. And then all of a sudden, the trains didn't happen, and all we see, they've cleared the side of the motorway, and now they're going to do 10-lane motorway. And I'm thinking, what happened to all these commitments? And I think last week I was listening to the Vice President's Meet the Press as well. He was talking about how he wanted to sort of bring in, I think, 100 EV-powered buses for a test run to see how that could work, so that we could do a bit more of the carpooling. But the thing about carpooling is that and it's not even about carpooling, it's about every system. When people are used to a certain way of doing things, you need to give them beyond reasonable doubt reasons to switch from those ways. So if you are going to implement carpooling, whoever is picking an Uber or driving their car, it must make financial sense to them to park their car or stop using an Uber and join any of those buses. If the cost for joining the bus and the stress for joining the bus is more than the stress that he goes through driving, there's no way in hell he's going to park his car and join your bus. He's not going to do that, because getting access to this bus is a problem for him. Comfort in this bus is a problem for him. Why would you risk your comfort sitting in your own car or picking an Uber versus sitting in the bus? For somebody who is not eco-conscious, environmental conscious, it doesn't make sense to them. They're not going to do it. And so everything around that needs to make sense. You need to have enough charging ports for these buses, because they are EV powered. You need to charge them. And even in making the ports for charging, you must not contribute to the brown sources of energy. It cannot be powered by, and there's this joke that we usually crack and say, you are saying that you want to go green, but you've built a house with a diesel power generator, and the diesel power generator is now what is going to charge your EV cars. Okoya now buy. Really, Okoya now buy. The diesel that you could have put straight into the car, you are using that to power a generator that is going to charge your EV powered car. Okoya now buy. Did you win or did you lose? You see, and so we must also be conscious that when we bring in the EV buses and we have the charging points, we do not contribute more brown into the grid. We need to go green into the grid. So if they are going to be solar powered or whatever, we need to be intentional about that. And that's important. And I think this is where I will join a lot of people and say planning has failed in Accra, in the city of Accra. Planning has failed woefully, because...
And it's still failing.
It's still failing too, because you go around Accra and you see a lot of buildings and there's some red paint on it that says, remove now, produce permits. I think it's the most common thing in Accra, anywhere in Accra. See, go to anywhere where a settlement is springing up, you see thousands of those things. And you wonder, why? Why? Because it's now so easy for anybody to just put up a building and later go and seek for the permits, because they know that when you go and apply for the permit, it's going to take years to get. And so as opposed to going through that stress, he would rather start the building and while he's doing it, go and apply for the permit. And there's a myth because when I was writing my thesis for my postgrad, I did my data collection somewhere around Botsiano, that hill where they say Asamoah lives, Tuba. Very close to the Ouija Dam. And then some of the residents told me that because people know they don't have permits and they are building, they'll put up the structure and they themselves will write on it, produce permits, so that when the town planning people come, they'll come and see. They say, "Oh, somebody has taken care of this one already." So they will intentionally put the notice on the building themselves. By the time you realize the building is completed, they don't have permits, and you can't sack the people anyway.
That's very smart.
You see, And see, and that was the first time I was hearing this. And when I listened to this, I'm like, all these things that happen for this place.
Yeah.
I was so shocked.
No.
And so, like, I mean, planning has failed us woefully. And I think that, but I don't think the hope is lost. We can do a lot more. So there's a lot of people putting up green spaces. We can revamp a Forest Lands Children's Park. There's a lot of green spaces that we need to protect with our lives.
Yeah.
Achimota Forest, for example, we need to protect that place. It's literally the only green space,
In Accra.
the green space in Accra. And we want to use that for something. I hear want to redevelop. Me, and I hear those things, I'm like,
It's crazy.
there's no other place to redevelop. Achimota Forest.
There's a lot to unpack here, but I also do recognize that we need to wrap up the discussion now.
Yeah.
I'll just one last question before like we do our outros. Do you think it's time to have a green party in Ghana? Do you think it's time for the climate activists to enter into the political? Because if you look at the state of our political conversation, none of the major parties are talking about it. How do we get them interested? And
I've always said this. The reason why we are not intentional and very, very sort of focal or aware about the problems of the climate crisis is because over the years, we've been unable to quantify the amount of harm that we're getting. So, for example, take COVID. Back when COVID was around, there was a count that was always done in the media. Every day, at the end of every day, we have the number of deaths, we have the number of infections. So people saw that these are real-time people dying. These are real people dying. And so everybody wear your mask, go and get the jab. But for climate, we don't quantify the deaths that are coming from the climate crisis. We don't quantify the harm, the loss and the damage from the climate crisis. Very few people are able to do that. So we're not intentional about addressing it, and we're not serious about addressing it. And that has also been, and that is why a lot of politicians don't take it serious. And for example, Galamsey became very topical in the 2020, I think 2020 election, not 2016. 2020 election, because we could see real time the way the rivers have become very brown. They were no longer clear, they were very brown. Everybody could see it. And so the politicians sort of, in very, very, very traditional political way, jumped on that conversation and said, oh, I'm going to do this about Galamsey, I'm going to do this about Galamsey. And that's why we've not seen the climate. I think a lot of climate people should get into politics. I don't think it will solve the problem. It's just like saying that if we have a gender issue, a lot of gender people should get into politics. If we have an employment issue, a lot of labor relations people to get into politics. We'll have a space that is saturated by so many people with vested interest. But for the environment and for climate, I think a lot of people can get in there because of how multidisciplinary it is.
Yes.
It's not just a one thing. It has a bearing on every other thing. Has a bearing on every other thing. And so, because generally speaking, even the field itself is multidisciplinary. People start all the way from agriculture, get into climate. People start from pure economics, get into climate. People study climate science, people study gender and get into climate. And so it's very multidisciplinary if you look at it. And so I think it's time a lot of climate people get into politics.
I agree with you. I agree with you fair and square. And I think this discussion has been very, very insightful. There's still like a lot of angles to still delve in. But I think what we've got from this is a very, very holistic understanding of climate change, the way in which it is affecting us in our daily lives, the ways in which we can start to look to remedy it, and really appreciative of the discussion. Before you go, we always give people the chance to be able to give their last words and then also be able to promote themselves. So this is my chance. 45 seconds on the most popular platform on YouTube.
Yeah, the Shouts podcast. First of all, let me say thank you for having me. It's been amazing watching you and Andrews do this from afar, and I think I'm very happy with what you've done, especially with the beer parlor.
Yes.
Yeah.
The beer parlor.
I think so far my most interesting episode has been, I think, one of Faithfulness episodes and Kareem's episode.
Oh yeah,
Kareem's episode was fire for me. So thank you very much for hosting me, and maybe let me do a promo for you guys before I do a promo for myself. So
go ahead.
Listen, like, leave a comment, share, subscribe to the Shout podcast, and wherever you are, I want you to make a very committed effort to try to reduce your carbon footprint. It's really not difficult to do. You need to be able to be intentional about it. You need to be able to commit to using less water, because water is a finite resource. You need to be able to break free from plastic. You need to be able to keep a reusable bowl so that you don't take single-use packaging. You need to be able to be conscious of how much food you take at buffets. Don't waste your food. Take only, it's a buffet. Once you have your first serving, you can always go back. You don't need to take everything at a time. And so, let's be conscious about the things that we do. And one last thing, maybe go onto social media, search Gayu Ghana on Instagram, Facebook, follow our pages, go to YouTube, LinkedIn, Green Africa Youth Organization, and do the same. And shout out to my tribe too. They know themselves, and Charlie, they keep me going.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we're going to be putting all of these links under our YouTube. But thank you so much for joining us, JJ.
Thanks, bro.
It really was a pleasure speaking to you, and we hope that we can have more of these conversations. Thank you guys for joining us for another brilliant episode, and see you the next time.